Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. I am here today with Brittany Holler and Paula Knudsen-Burke to talk about really a groundbreaking lawsuit that Brittany and Paula filed in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. So welcome to the program, Brittany and Paula.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and Paula.
So, Brittany, you're the journalist sort of at the center of this, and Paula, you're the able attorney making things happen and doing the filing. So let's first explain what's going on. What are you rabble-rousing about these days?
So we have filed a suit against Allegheny County over a media policy that the Allegheny County Jail's media policy, which basically says that people working in the jail are not to contact media without first going through their higher ups. And if they do that, they can be terminated, right? Is that?
Yeah, they can be disciplined or they can be terminated. So we filed this lawsuit in federal court. So in Pennsylvania, we have 3 district courts. This is pending in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania, and we filed last month. We're now in September, so it was last month. I'm with the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, and we're a nonprofit law firm based in Washington, D.C. I'm the Pennsylvania-based attorney, and we're co-counseling on this case with a law clinic from Yale. And so this is a really exciting opportunity for the students at the Yale Law School Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic, which is a long name, but they are essentially lawyers and law students who are very interested in freedom of information issues. And so we're really glad that we have Brittany as our client, and this is an important issue. And maybe Rebecca, if Brittany could share kind of some of the work she's been doing on the jail.
Absolutely. And so just to contextualize, Allegheny County includes Pittsburgh. So this is not, just some little hole in the wall somewhere. This is a real city with a sizable population. And, I hear all the time about sort of gag orders that PIOs are under, and just really, I think in context, it's like the difficulty of gathering just the baseline information you need for reporting. So, Brittany, tell us a little bit about what you've been working on and why this and why now, because this has been a frustration for years. So what broke that camel's back?
So I started reporting on deaths in custody at the Allegheny County Jail in 2020. The first death I ever reported on was Daniel Pastrick, which we fought for his autopsy with Paula, and that's a whole other case and another story. But as I've continued looking into deaths in custody, I started to track them and report them. And since Mr. Pastrick died, 19 other men have died in custody or following their incarceration at the Allegheny County Jail. It has been really hard to report that. It's taken years to come back to a case that I knew about before. And a lot of that is because of trying to get over this obstacle of getting answers out of the county. I have sources that are inside the jail that are confirming things for me, but they cannot go on record about them. And then I'm having to circumvent that and come up with inventive ways to file right to know requests, or in some cases, an entire court case in order to get information that I know is true And I have multiple people confirming that for me, but they're too afraid to go on record for fear of losing their job.
So before we get into sort of the mechanics of how information is being suppressed and what you're doing, I just had to go back to 20 deaths in police custody in the past couple of years. That seems like a mind-blowing number. Is that sort of typical for Allegheny County, or is there something that's spurring those deaths?
I think that the fact that I'm looking is why we have a very high death rate. I think that in the past, local media and then local governments aren't readily notifying folks of when someone dies in a jail. So I
Hmm.
don't know if Allegheny is necessarily an outlier in its rate because we don't actually know what's going on in the other jails. If there was a Pittsburgh Institute for Nonprofit Journalism in every other city, there would probably be a high death rate there too, because we're uncovering something that was not being reported. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, because it's hard
Well,
to assess it and compare it when we're living in a vacuum of information in other places. So
That
and
makes
and
perfect depressing sense. Paula,
yeah,
I'm
it
sorry.
does. And the other thing is, Pennsylvania has 67 counties.
yep.
Our counties have county jails that house people prior to um, their trial, or sometimes for low-level offenses, they're incarcerated at county facilities. But the amount of information that we're able to glean about many things occurring in these kinds of institutions is very low.
Mhm.
And the reporting about deaths in custody does happen, but sometimes how a person's death is defined, as
Mhm.
Brittany's reporting has uncovered, a person might be incarcerated and then they are sick at the facility and released, but they
Mhm.
die. I'm doing air quotes here. Let me get that on camera. They're released, and then they die shortly after they were at the facility. So
Mm.
there's a lot of question marks. And I think the other case that Brittany was referring to, we just had litigation wrap up after 3-ish years, almost 3 years, trying to get the autopsy for Mr. Pastrick. And the county fought us at every level. And finally, the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court, in a 6-1 decision, said, no, you have to turn over these records. But these kinds of records, death records for death in custody, are just exceedingly difficult to get, no matter what county we're talking about. And it's unfortunate that this is Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and we're still talking about a very low level of information. So I think Brittany's dogged reporting on this facility really feeds into the current case that we're talking about. She's a person who's very well versed in the happenings at the prison, but she can't get employees to talk to her because
Right.
of the gag policy.
So I just want to make sure that we're clear, because of course every state has different open records laws. So
Mhm.
in Pennsylvania, are autopsy records from the jail supposed to be public records? There's so many places where the records are supposed to be public, and custodians are just saying, "Well, go ahead, sue me. I'm still not going to give it to you." So is it that type of case, or are
So,
you? What is the public records outlook there?
so I would definitely encourage you, your viewers, to check out the Reporters Committee Open Government Guide. We have one that's free for every state, and you can read about autopsies. And I will double check and make sure that we've got our Pennsylvania guide updated. But up until this point, the answer was yes, we should have been able to
Mhm.
see these records. But many counties in Pennsylvania were recalcitrant and said, oh, sorry, you can't have them. And in Brittany's case, because of a small change in state law several years ago, the county's position was, because she was a non-governmental actor and she was asking for this record, she had to show that she was trying to establish liability. And their interpretation of that piece of the law was that only persons operating in the legal system, so personal injury lawyers and the like, were entitled to these records. And investigative journalists trying to shed light on operations at the prison, no, she was not entitled to these records. So even though our position was the law was quite clear, the county denied her, and we did ultimately um, succeed in having our appellate court confirm her right of access. But these types of records are difficult to access in Pennsylvania, and as you know, many other places in the
Absolutely.
country. So our open government guide and open courts guides are really helpful for journalists, in Maryland and other places in the country to try to figure out what is the lay of the land for certain kinds of records, including autopsy records.
So you in the prior suit, you had the autopsy records that was a point of contention, and that's been resolved. And so one normally files suit because you think you have a chance either to clarify, to create precedent. So what do you hope to get out of this suit?
Well, I'll answer first, Brittany, and then you can jump in. I took a local media call about this case shortly after it was filed, and I was chatting with the journalist, and he wanted to know, how much money were we looking for? And I said, well, that's not the kind of case this is.
Right.
We're asking for a judge here in the Western District of Pennsylvania, a federal judge, to review the facts and the policy in place in Allegheny County and determine that it's unconstitutional and to stop it. So this isn't a lawsuit for Brittany, to waltz off into the sunset and make lots of money. This is a public policy lawsuit to say this practice is wrong and it should stop. And I think Brittany can speak to, what that would mean to her and other reporters if they were able to just pick up the phone and talk to people without these extremely restrictive policies. We detailed some of that in our complaint, and I'm happy to share our page on that with the complaint. But I
Mhm.
think for journalists on the ground, this would be a game changer.
Yeah.
I do feel like it would be a game changer, but Brittany, how would it change your reporting? Like, what if you had access to, I guess, public access to the people that you're privately speaking to? What would it mean for this story or your coverage, and ultimately the public?
Well, I think, I teach intro to journalism at the University of Pittsburgh. And one of the things I always tell students is never just report out of the press release. You have to hold the government to account just as much as you would anyone else you're interviewing. And I think some of the frustration that me and other journalists who cover the jail in Allegheny County is the press release is saying one thing, and the only other time you get access to these officials is at these jail oversight board meetings, and they
Mm.
start to contradict themselves, in public, and there's that discrepancy. And then I'm hearing a totally different story from the people on the inside. And so the public isn't getting the full purview of all the different positions. And that's what our job is to do, is to lay out the information that we have, everyone's position, and find the story in between that. It would revolutionize what I know. I mean, I would be able to actually report what I know. I think most journalists say we can only ever report 10% of what we know. I mean, at this point, the percentage is like dropping because I know so much and can't report it. It would also validate the community. Like
Mhm.
there are people who are incarcerated and their families who are reporting stories, and we're reporting out from what the incarcerated are saying, but people have stereotypes about that. The county is
Sure.
contradicting that. And then you have workers who are echoing that. That would be huge. That would change the narrative completely. And I think it would help for everyone who's covering a jail. I know that the prisons and jails are a black box of information anyway.
Mhm.
It's such a hard institution to report on. And if you have workers who are willing to talk to the media about what's going on, you really have quite a story.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
it's not always in their best interest to come forward either. I mean, they're worried, they're concerned,
Mhm.
and it's a shame that we can't tell people what they're concerned about.
Well, and here it does feel like if you're able to publicly connect the dots, that is such an impetus for change.
Yeah.
And it is huge and groundbreaking. So because this is in the Western District, it's in the federal system. Explain to me, because I get a little turned around sometimes in how far, if you're successful in the ruling and are able to make that, get the precedent to have that change, that you can access that. How far does that reach? Is that throughout the entire Western District, or is it just your little neck of the woods?
So the Western District of Pennsylvania extends up to Erie and down to the West Virginia border. So it covers somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 counties. Then the next federal district over is the Middle District of Pennsylvania. Then there's
Mhm.
the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and all of our districts are within the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. So it would certainly, this, whatever ruling we get would certainly carry weight in the Western District of Pennsylvania, and it would be important to our other federal districts. If it goes up on appeal, it will
Mhm.
go to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and then beyond that, it would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. And you mentioned, earlier, Rebecca, about why is it that it's taken so long for someone to file this kind of challenge? And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the important role of the Society of Professional Journalists in
Mm.
really pushing the issue of restrictions on public employees' ability to speak through the practice of public information officers, or PIOs. And for years, the Society for Professional Journalists has been looking at this issue, the idea of a legal challenge, and they have some fabulous resources on the SPJ website and some of their chapter websites about how would a journalist challenge these kinds of practices. So
Mhm.
a then professor at the Breckner School in Florida wrote a fabulous paper kind of outlining how a journalist would go about doing this. And Brittany is a journalist who's now made these kinds of challenges. One is a First Amendment claim that she's lodging for the employee, that the employee can't speak. And the second claim is Brittany Haler. I can't hear it. I can't hear the message. I can't report it out because
Mhm.
this person is silent. So it's a legal claim that's squarely within the First Amendment, and it's something that a lot of folks have been hoping for over the years to see this kind of challenge. But if we're successful, it doesn't mean a sea change for the entire country,
Mhm.
obviously, because we're just in this small piece of jurisprudence within the United States. But hopefully, it begins a sea change and a
Right.
conversation. And even in Allegheny County, which is an interesting form of government run by the county executive, and the Allegheny County is looking at an election coming up that will change um, policies and who's been in office for a number of years. So maybe even it will have impact on decisions that future office holders will come to say, gee, maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe there's benefit in having an open and transparent public discourse rather than squelching speech, particularly from those willing speakers. So someone who wants to speak, wants to talk to Brittany and other journalists and explain what's happening in these important matters of public concern, they're not able to do so under these gag policies. So ultimately, that's what we're looking for, that relief and legal relief. And we're hoping that that this is a case that others can look to,
Mhm.
um, and perhaps, use this litigation as a template elsewhere.
Absolutely, because it is a widespread issue, especially around policing and jails. There's just so much that needs to be brought to light there. And so, Brittany, I know this is not the only thing you're working on. So, how does this suit, or because I would imagine that your sources know about it and so forth. How is it affecting the other projects that you're reporting on? Are you finding that, you know, um, government officials are more in lockstep to say, no, I don't want to talk to you at all? Or are you finding ways through?
I haven't. Right now, I'm building with Penn Live and Joshua Vaughn at Penn Live a death database of
Hmm.
in custody jail deaths in Pennsylvania that was funded by the Pulitzer Center. So I'm actually dealing with outside of Allegheny County right now in a lot of my reporting.
Okay.
But I have filed some right to knows, and they're getting denied, which isn't necessarily unusual.
So true.
But I'm kind of getting clogged in that way. And I have like 3 different filings in the Office of Open Records right now, so which is a little bit more than usual.
Mhm.
But other than that, I mean, I haven't been able to speak directly to other branches of government or employees anyway. So it's not necessarily impacted me in that way. It's kind of business as usual, which is going around trying to get sources, filing right to knows, having to do the due diligence outside of um, speaking directly to someone in an office, whether that's the medical examiner or the health department or Department of Human Services. But I think that's pretty much par for the course for most journalists. I mean, most of us are going through this silos, so it's not totally different than it was before. And that's kind of the spirit of the case. It was, what do we have to lose? That we're not getting information anyway. What retaliation can exist? I'm having to go around and circumvent this regardless. So
You're already at the bottom, where can you go from there?
can't be less transparent than that you're not transparent. So might as well try it and see and hope that we can make a change.
Well, and the other thing is the reporters committees in 2020 launched the local legal initiative program, which is we placed free lawyers in a handful of states. So Brittany's getting free legal support to do this, and that's awesome. That she has that support through the Yale Clinic and through the reporters committees. So but
That is
it's
huge. I mean, it really is, because so many journalists, I think, would file suit or would take advantage of pressing on those issues, but they don't have the legal support at the ready. And when you're trying to file stories or do your day job, it's really hard to keep sort of that meticulous set of records and go through the steps and not get frustrated and just walk away.
Well, I mean, Paula and I met almost 3 years ago for this other public information request. And because I'm a maniac, I stuck to it for, you have to be obsessed on some level in terms of record keeping and having the time and the privilege to do that kind of work. I work in my own nonprofit, so I have the freedom to pursue the stories that I want to. Media, daily reporters, people who are on the grind, they might not have the resources or the bandwidth to be like, oh, that request from several years ago, whatever happened with that? I don't know. I'm
Right,
a
you
very,
might get
very
bitter about one and remember like the one that got away.
yeah.
But I think, like the project management that's involved in reporting is so sort of just brushed aside, because it takes, you have to be hyper organized. You have to juggle a lot of balls and know which threads to pull at any given time. So I give
And
you a
be
lot
like
of
a
credit.
document hoarder on some level. Like my digital footprint is probably insane, honestly.
Well, I'm glad it is, because this is real substantive work, and the effect that this could have, not just in precedent, but on the families of those who have died in custody. It must be just devastating to kind of scream out into the void,
Yeah.
and because of your circumstance, truly not be believed. And so, what have you talked to those families about what it would mean to have stories like this come through?
Um, I have not directly spoken to folks. A lot of the people that I've covered, I kind of that we have recent deaths right now that we're trying to actually get the records for. So we're in this other kind of silo, and I haven't been really, like, oh, and by the way, we're doing this other thing, kind of like we're a little bit have blinders on and trying to obtain the autopsies for the other 19 men that died. So we received one autopsy that was a part of the court case, and now the county's dragging its feet on releasing the other 19. I don't know if they will. I don't know. That's been this whole other nut to crack. So that's kind of been the focus of the families is where is that going, and do we know yet what's in them? Is there a pattern? That kind of stuff.
Do you feel like I'm sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead with your follow-up. I just wanted to bounce something else out before I forgot, but go ahead with your follow-up.
We'll cross our fingers so we don't forget.
Right.
But I was curious, oftentimes, especially on things having to do with death, custodians cite privacy concerns, or it's not appropriate. The family wouldn't want that. Are you finding that that's one of the excuses that you're given, or is it true just radio silence?
That was the county's argument.
That was one of them. That was one of their arguments.
It was one of the arguments they threw up in this whole process was that I think at one point they said something to the effect of that I was just going to publish these really horrific documents on the internet. And I have obtained other autopsies outside of the county through families who literally brought these very graphic, heartbreaking documents to me in hopes of holding the county to account. So I have not once encountered an actual family that was in opposition to it. But it was definitely an argument that the county made repeatedly. And I say that I wanted to add that some of these men don't have family. So there is no one to request a document. So if we were functioning under the argument of the county, there would be some people who died in custody and no one would ever be able to obtain their record outside of some sort of lawyer. And, someone who maybe didn't have family, who was homeless, what lawyer was going to come and randomly
even know enough to ask
somebody. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but that was part of the county's argument.
Well,
interesting. Paul, what did you want?
Yeah, I wanted just to add in, I mean, we've been focusing a lot because Brittany's work is very laser focused on the prison and correctional settings and law enforcement. But let's not forget that these PIO practices can be seen in many different places, school districts, townships, counties, the federal government, take your pick. And so one of the resources that I think is helpful that the SPJ has is, you're not able to file a lawsuit. You don't have the wherewithal. What do? So you're being met with this resistance. And one of their tips that I thought was really kind of an interesting way to go about it is to write about the policies. And I know journalists who have written about it, sometimes as an explainer or a sidebar, why we can't tell you more about the story, and sometimes as the main story itself. So these kinds of policies in most states would be subject to the state public records law. Ask for them. Why can't I talk to this person? What is the policy? If there are multiple policies, get the policies. It would be a best practice for agencies to put up these policies online so everybody understands, oh, okay, this is why. And we could discuss the merits of it. But the fact that some agencies won't even release their PIO policies, let alone talk about them, let alone even, explore the possibility of having more than one person who can speak on behalf of the government entity. These are a lot of the issues that come into play. And so it's for sure that not everybody is going to have the ability, as Brittany talked about earlier, she works for a small nonprofit, and she was able to secure pro bono services. If journalists are in a place where they're struggling to live with these records, sometimes the editorial power of writing about it and exposing kind of the public policy fallacies of this kind of system particularly we saw during COVID when there were so
Mhm.
many limitations on the information that could be shared on important topics. So, we're just glad that this lawsuit gives folks the opportunity to think about the ways in which they are reporting in these troubling circumstances, and maybe gives people some inspiration or food for thought about how they go about dealing with it. But that's one thought. Write about it. File some public records requests, and that's a pretty low hanging fruit
Mhm.
proposition.
I think too, spreading awareness that it could be a first, or it is a First Amendment claim, that even calling this into question is great to spread like wildfire. Like when we first filed, I had other journalists saying, I didn't even know this wasn't legal. Like I didn't know that this was, everybody does it. What do you mean? It didn't occur to me
Right.
that you could file a suit about this. It's always been how it is. For reporters of my generation, we didn't really ever have access. It was, I think things have changed since I've become a journalist. So I think spreading the awareness that even you can challenge it and you should ask for the policy is good.
Agreed. I feel like I love both the sort of groundbreaking, large scale items that you talked about in your suit, but also the practical ways that journalists today can sort of push back against that culture, because it is a cultural shift that needs to happen. Um, so I want to thank you both for joining me today, but I also want to know, when is the decision expected?
Well, Rebecca, it's a great question, but I'll give you your favorite lawyer answer. I don't know. I mean, the county, I think their answer is due back next month, and we're just in the initial stages of this.
Mhm.
So I wish I could tell you tomorrow we're going to have an amazing decision, but as most things within the justice system, the wheels turn slowly.
Absolutely.
But we have a fabulous communications team at the Reporters Committee, and along with our co-counsel at Yale, we'll certainly put out updates as they become available. So, thank you for your interest. Thank you for all your listeners and members who are out there struggling through PIO practices, and keep at it. And we'll be carrying on here in Pennsylvania and hopefully getting a good result.
Absolutely. We are all counting on you. So thank you for your work and your time. Appreciate it. And we'll have you back when the decision comes down in the sometime in the future.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.